Within the last 2 decades, there has been an upsurge in terror activities linked to radical Islamist expansion groups on the African continent, particularly those led by groups subscribing to the Salafi jihadi doctrine. Often referred to as jihadist Salafism, the Salafi jihadi is a blend of religious and political ideologies based on the Islamist call for a global caliphate, endorsement of jihad, and a return to puritanical or true Islam. Historically, the ideological framework for Salafism was laid by the Egyptian Islamic scholar Sayyid Qutb in the 1960s.
Kar ka kulla wa kowa sharri, kar ka yi wa kowa sihiri, amma ka tashi ka tsaya da addu'o'i da azkar Allah ya kare ka daga wani.
Recently, Nigeria's Communications and Digital Economy Minister Dr. Isa Pantami was in the crosshairs of public criticism over his Salafist-leaning views, with incendiary sermons of him praising Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. Unfortunately, these expansionist views enjoy some sympathy across parts of Africa. In the Sahel, jihadist insurgent groups using Salafism as the basis for their expansionist agenda have grown in number and popularity among locals in the region. They appeal to the people of the region by providing pseudo-government, security, an accessible justice system, and providing certain amenities. These become attractive to locals who see themselves far removed from the government at the center or in urban cities. The Sahel region comprises of 10 African countries: Senegal, Mauritania, Mali, Burkina Faso, Algeria, Niger, Nigeria, Chad, Sudan, and Eritrea. The region has become a hotbed for an alarming number of groups that identify with the Salafi jihadi movement. The Sahel has a semi-arid climate spanning over 3 million square kilometers, roughly the size of India or Argentina. It is known for its trade routes, which predate colonial boundaries, enabling the movement of goods and people between the Mediterranean, North Atlantic Ocean, and West Africa. A few reasons account for why the Sahel is an attractive zone for the expansionist movement for radical Islam. Firstly, the Sahel is attractive to these groups because the region's predominant religion for centuries has been Islam, as the then Umayyads and Abbasids empires pushed the boundaries of Islam through to the west of the Arabian Peninsula. The religion and the culture of the region have since then been fused in such a way that it creates a ready field of Islamic extremist groups with jihadi orientations to create illegitimate governments, provide basic social amenities for residents of the region, such as healthcare, education, food, and water. Secondly, Islam's influence on the region has come from two main sources: the Middle East and South Asia. For this reason, it is not uncharacteristic to identify two ideological streams, secularism and Islamist. The sharp rise in the radicalization of the region signifies the obvious influence of the latter ideological stream. Members of the Islamist persuasion lean heavily towards theocratic expansionist ideals, which have since received active or passive support from people in the region, as evidenced by the growing number of willing young men supportive to jihadi activities, acting as foot soldiers for groups like Boko Haram and ISWAP. Thirdly, the region's large swaths of ungoverned land that stretch for miles give ample space for terrorist cells to bud unhindered. With technology, criminal and terrorist enterprises can use satellite phones to communicate and trucks to easily traverse the desert area, even going as far as Tamarasset through Mukhtar, both in Algeria from Kidal, Mali, in just under 34 hours. For this reason, fighting cross-border jihadism becomes even more difficult. Fourthly, security presence through some of the travel routes in the region is little to non-existent, given how massive the expanse of desert land is. This makes the region a soft spot for extremist groups to navigate through cross-border towns to carry out their operations. A good example would be the recent 7-minute footage released by Boko Haram showing a mid-air explosion of the Nigerian Alpha jet fighting above its fighters. Even though the claim by Boko Haram to have downed the jet has been shown to be fake, it raises worrying concerns that the terror group could very easily have access to the crash site before the Nigerian military. Given the lack of security presence in large swaths of land across the region, weak government, negative effects of climate change, poverty, and so on, it is little wonder why jihadist groups find the area as a foothold for their expansionist ideology. These conditions are not unfamiliar, as they are similar to what we have seen in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria, countries in which terror groups like Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, and ISIS run amok. The Horn of Africa, the easternmost projection of the continent, comprises Djibouti, Eritrea, Ethiopia, Somalia, and Somaliland. However, terror activities in the region go beyond the nearly 2 million square kilometers of the region deep into East Africa. Lately, the presence of terror cells, active jihadist groups, and attacks have been common in Tanzania, Mozambique, Kenya, Uganda, Burundi, and South Sudan. Terror activities in the Horn of Africa draw significant inspiration from Al-Shabaab in Somalia. Despite the growing foreign military presence in Djibouti, the spate of attacks on Somalia have not waned. However, the attacks have not been limited to Somalia alone, with periodic incursions and attacks on Kenya and Tanzania. The Horn's attractiveness to terror networks stems largely from its geographical contiguity with the Middle East. For instance, the distance between Yemen and Djibouti is a mere 762 kilometers. African terror groups looking to gain a foothold in various areas of operation look towards the Middle East for spiritual guidance as well as training and logistics. The short distance between both regions also affords large swaths of ungoverned spaces and countries with weak government presence, which gives non-state actors a lot of legroom to operate. Being the hardest hit by terrorism in the continent and listed as third in the Global Terrorism Index with over 22,441 deaths since 2001, we now focus our attention on reports of jihadist expansionist plans to southern Nigeria. Recently, Nigerians on social media have been reacting to news that some of the deadliest terror groups in the world were moving southwards towards the country's economic nerve center. These reactions followed some local media quotes of Major General Dagvin Anderson, the commander of the United States Special Operations Command Africa, about plans by terrorist groups Al-Qaeda and ISIS to penetrate southern Nigeria and other parts of West Africa. According to the Sunday Tribune, Anderson said the U.S. will continue to partner with Nigeria in sharing intelligence. He said, "We have engaged with Nigeria and continue to engage with them in intel sharing and in understanding what these violent extremists are doing." Anderson's statements reflect growing concern over security in coastal areas of West Africa as jihadist groups spread their operations and activities in parts of the Sahel, particularly Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. The media briefing shares similarities with a previous briefing made in August 2020, where Major General Anderson also said Al-Qaeda was making inroads into northwest Nigeria. Although the commander's statements on the threat posed by extremist groups in Nigeria is likely based on intelligence and assessments of these groups and trends, some of his warnings to a certain extent don't fit the existing jihadist trajectory in the country.
We are looking at that problem. We're focused more on how it's Islamic State there in West Africa is developing in conjunction with Boko Haram. And so we are working with Nigeria to address that problem. We would like to see more effort put towards that because we are very concerned about how Islamic State is continuing to develop there and continuing to evolve. And we're also concerned about how the Islamic State affiliate in West Africa.
An important question to address is why these groups would be interested in moving towards littoral areas. The answer is not far-fetched and appears to be two-pronged. Firstly, there is an economic advantage to moving southward. Southern Nigeria is the epicenter of much of the country's economic activities and where its major source of forex, oil, is located. Like Mozambique, key infrastructures around the production of oil are closer to coastal areas, and this is likely a major motivation to move across the river Niger. What this demonstrates, we believe, is that there are fewer economic activities in the Sahel due to issues of drought, desertification, and security threat. Also, beyond sporadic kidnapping for ransom of locals in the region or forced taxation, there is no way for these groups to finance their activities. In other places where jihadist groups have built a financing network, they have laid claim to mineral deposits that they can easily trade for money. For example, Larry Mott and Gregorian note that these terrorist financing networks have been involved in the purchase and sale of diamonds in Sierra Leone, Liberia, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. Proceeds from the sale of these blood diamonds are reported to fund Hezbollah, Lebanese resistant detachment, and Al-Qaeda operations. This is another reason we have seen an increase in attacks on gold mines in Zamfara state. Secondly, in keeping with its theocratic and expansionist agenda to build an Islamic caliphate, there is a need for these jihadist groups to expand beyond their current location in the Sahel. By overwhelming the Nigerian military using guerrilla tactics, these groups are hoping to establish terrorist cells in northwest and north-central Nigeria, strong enough to penetrate the southern geopolitical region of the country. It is important to note that even though there is brewing concern around the movements of Islamic militant groups towards coastal areas, they have not made significant progress entering the urban communities of Niger, Chad, Mali, Mauritania, and Nigeria. In Nigeria, for example, territorial areas formerly under the control of Boko Haram and ISWAP, like Marte, have been reclaimed and are now under the control of the Nigerian military. With constant attacks on border towns in the northeast and now the northwest of the country, it is unclear how long the already stretched military will be able to keep regained territories under its control. So far, the furthest south that any of the three terrorist groups has operated is in Kogi State. In 2013, Ansaru claimed responsibility for an attack near the town of Okene on a military detachment heading to Mali for peacekeeping operations. This attack killed 2 soldiers and 5 others. 3 years later, the leader of the organization, Usman Abubakar Umar, who was also known as Khalid al-Barnawi, was arrested in Lokoja, the state capital.
Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah alladhi amara ibadahu bittaqwa wa amara an-nasa bittaqwa.
In June 2014, Abubakar Shekau claimed responsibility for 2 explosions at a fuel depot in Lagos, which killed at least 2 people. His claims were corroborated by unnamed security analysts who noted that the first attack was the work of a female suicide bomber, while the other was an improvised explosive device thrown over a fence. However, official accounts of the incident tag it as being caused by a gas canister explosion, raising suspicion that the true nature of the incident was suppressed. The capacity of these groups to extend operations south of the river Niger will involve overcoming numerous obstacles and challenges, particularly the cultural, historical, social, and geographical difference between the terrain in the south and the north. On a historical note, the South has had fewer interactions with sects that subscribe to the Salafi jihadi expansionist ideology, meaning that Muslims in the south of Nigeria would be considered more secularist than Islamist. Crucially, in the South, religion does not form the core of identity as it does in the North. Culturally, much of the predominant ethnic groups in the south of the country lean towards Euro-American values in contrast to those of Middle Eastern and South Asian influence that is commonplace in the north. Following several failed attempts to establish cattle ranches in the south of the country and the growing allegations of kidnappings being carried out by people of Fulani herding communities, clashes with communities in the middle belt of the country, and the rise of local vigilante groups, there is likely to be less reception for groups who identify with an Islamist agenda, as we see up north. On a geographical note, the southern part of Nigeria is primarily tropical, with rainforest in sharp contrast to the north, which is primarily savanna and is being encroached upon by the Sahara Desert. Terrorist groups in the north have long been able to take advantage of the terrain to carry out their operations. So far, it is yet to be seen, at least in countries where Islamist groups are prominent, whether these groups can operate successfully and hold camps in the rainforest. These factors are strategic towards hindering or aiding the groups to gain local support and build an operational base. Nevertheless, the current deterioration of the security and economic resilience of the country needs to be addressed to ensure long-term stability and security.